name is Dom Pates. I am a senior educational technologist at City University of London. I've been at City since about 2014, so a little bit long in the tooth there now. And my talk today, which I'm going to just remember to set a little timer for there as well. Do feel free to prompt me if I overrun media and learning, by all means. I'm going to tell you a little bit about, I suppose, my pursuit of what we might call a podcasting solution or service at our institution. I answered the question with yes, because I suppose we do, but whether it's the full service that I might imagine our staff to want, or our students, I think, as you'll find during the talk, I'm not sure whether it's a full service, but it's a service of sorts. Okay, so let's go to a little bit of history first. The concept of a podcast, attaching an audio file to an RSS feed, was first supposedly proposed in 2000. And the concept was written about by a guy called Ben Hammersley in the British newspaper The Guardian in 2004. And by the way, I've got a few links that I'll ask Dovi to share in the chat or after the event as well. So some of this stuff refers to things I've got links for to share. Hammersley wrote, "All the ingredients are there for a new boom in amateur radio," as he described it at the time. But what to call it? Audio blogging, podcasting, guerrilla media. So in that we can see lots of elements like roots in blogging, which was an earlier sort of user-generated new media. Podcasting, obviously we've got a technology there. The iPod, I think, was in existence then, but the iPhone wasn't. Guerrilla media, perhaps that leads to the removal of gatekeepers a little, and the idea of user-generated content again. Now, the graph that you'll see on the screen is one from Google Trends. So this is what has Google observed about the searches for the term podcast over time. So I started at when Hammersley coined the term. Because obviously 2000 to 2004 we weren't calling them podcasts, and I think we can see there was a big spike 2005, 2006, 7, and it sort of leveled off and went along quite steady for several years. So I'm using this as a proxy for interest in the what's the overview of interest in podcasting. As the medium perhaps matured or faded, I don't know whether this maps onto the diffusion of innovation curve at all, but we see in more recent years the interest has gone up. Some of that is perhaps the medium maturing, some of it is things like bigger organizations like Spotify moving in big into the podcasting space. Some of it is things like the effect, I would argue, of the pandemic in changing our digital media consumption habits and our means of operating more online than in person. We were all stuck in our houses. So some of this around about this point on the screen, I'm not sure whether you can see my cursor very well there or not, but as it starts to rise up in the greater area of interest, around, I'd mark it at something like 2017, 16, 17, 18. I noticed a lot more people coming to me and going, "I'm interested in starting a podcast. Have you got any suggestions? Have you got any advice? Have you got any ideas?" So that really, and I work with academics, senior academic leaders, program directors, module leaders, etc. So I think we're beginning to see the mainstreaming of this new 21st century medium, and a lot of interest in it in education here. So at City, I mean, I dug back a little bit when I first got these questions, and I noticed that In the early days, 2008, we had a service up and running before I even joined the institution. We had it hosted on the University of London Computing Centre servers, which is a facility in London that lots of universities would use for hosting content. Now, I've got a significant gap between these two items, because obviously we were part of the first wave, and then things tailed off. And in the first wave, we published things to iTunes U, which is no longer widely used. I had lots of academics come to me, and we didn't really have what I would have called a solution at the time. So there are various different ways that I'd recommend that they would approach something like this. A really nice recent example that we've got is the City Law School Law and Society podcast. This is the most recent one that I really like. I've got a link to an interview with the academics that did this. And this is one that came out of the experience, I would think, of lockdowns and the pandemic. And these academics chose for their undergraduate law module to replace in-person or online lectures with podcasts, and to really lean into the medium of it as well. The link to that particular one is just in the chat as well. So when I talk to academics about podcasting, I tell them that there are basically 3 stages that they need to think about. And I think crafting a message about a complex technology or process needs to be done in a relatively simple way if somebody has an interest in adopting it in their practice. First one is recording, and you can record a podcast on your phone super easy, or you can have a studio that does it all for you. But in some ways, individuals have the power to easily record a podcast. On the other end of that is syndication. So once you've got a podcast, an audio file, whatever, hosted on the internet, then it's getting it out to different platforms, and that's where RSS as the standard comes in. It's an open protocol, so it's quite a straightforward one to use. The tricky one is the one in the middle. So hosting servers have a cost associated with them. The other 2 aspects don't really. And this is the challenge that I've found we faced at City, is either you find a free host online, we have an institutional service for it, or somewhere in the middle. So this has been the one that I've been most in pursuit of, is trying to find a way to sort out hosting for podcasts. There's a picture of the public square that faces the main building there at University of London. I've had a lot of conversations internally within the department I'm part of, which is currently called Digital Education. Had a lot of discussions with our IT department, who've taken it to marketing, as they would often bring queries to me as well from academics. I want to start a podcast, where do we go? A lot of this initial work led to what I would have called our service, our solution. Now, my colleague Emma Gilbert developed this podcasting guide, which we also have a link for. We can find this coming into the chat soon. And this covers a lot of the main stages that I discussed. As you can see from the graph, we've had some pretty good viewings of it. We've had a number of workshops. We've had a number of people attending. So we could say that podcasting is available as a service at City as well. The one distinction that we've got here is that this solution is podcasting to within the walled garden of our VLE. It's you can podcast to. It's like talking in a lecture theatre. There is a closed environment. You can't speak to the people outside of it because we haven't seeded it onto the wider web as well. And this raises interesting questions, I think, about the open or closed nature of higher education. I think. So this, this was great because when academics would come to us, we could say, yeah, we've got a solution. Here it is. Here's the guidance. We can give you support for it, etc. But when, like with the law colleagues that said, no, I want this to be available on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, as the phrase goes, wherever you get your podcasts, then we had a deeper challenge. So I decided to try and see what I could do to figure out how that could be achieved. 5 minutes, thank you, Monika. We had a good look at our media hosting platform, which is Kaltura. So nod to John in the chat there as well. And got so very close, but for some reason we couldn't quite figure out the best way forward for using them. So I went out onto the web to see what else I could find. Here are a few examples of my sort of roaming the web and exploring the medium of podcasting and trying to understand it better so that I could bring it back to my staff and have a more informed response to them. Pod Only Knows was a sort of taster for me to go using Anchor FM, which is Spotify's free hosting platform. I thought, well, what are the technicalities of it? Let's just try this out. Teaching Here and There is a podcast that I launched with a couple of colleagues in a year and a half ago. And this is one using the same technologies, but it's one that explores the emerging conversations around hybrid teaching. So it's been a research opportunity as well. A couple of other ones I've guested on, so it's been really interesting to speak to other podcasters about their practice and share some of my knowledge. So it's been interesting to do things either way. And I wrote a lot of this experience up in a Medium article I published earlier on this month. Now, I'm going to get a little bit short on time, so I'll rush through these last slides a little bit, but these will be shared after the event as well. So with our head of digital marketing, I decided to ask the sector a little bit more as well and say, what else is out there? What other solutions do we have? So we put a short survey together, and as you'll see on the screen here, there are hints of some of these sorts of questions that we were asking. I offer this, I'd be happy to offer this to Media and Learning as a framework if it was interested in a wider question, a wider survey about this, because I think we've thought about some of the questions there. We got 8 responses back from different institutions, and there was some really interesting details. I think in summary, no one really has a standard for this yet. There is a range of different approaches that everybody had. But there are a couple of really nice exemplars that came out of my reaching out to the sector. One of them was from the University of Oxford, who built their own service and is kind of a leading light in the UK HE scene on this. They use Drupal and they host everything themselves, and I think they're quite established here. UCL also have service they call UCL Minds, I think it is. And they use SoundCloud mainly for this and hosted within a WordPress platform as well. There's a couple of really nice examples out there. So I suppose my pitch is, there's still a lot of innovation, exploration happening in this space, but I don't think that as a sector we've fully matured on a common approach yet. So that's me. I'll hand over to Monika and Dovi for either moving straight on to the next one or opening the floor for any comments and questions.
Great, thank you very much, Dominic. So the next one is University of Galway.
Okay, just 1 second while I share slides. Can you see our slides?
Yeah, they're there. Well, your very busy desktop is there.
Oh, very busy. I should have tried it. 1 second. How's that?
Yeah,
There.
looking good.
Okay. Second. Okay, great. Well, hello, everybody. Firstly, thanks to Dolby Sally and the Media and Learning Association for inviting us, and Monika for chairing. So my name is Jeremiah. I'm a learning technologist with the College of Science and Engineering and the Centre for Excellence and Learning and Teaching at the University of Galway. And I'm going to co-present the session with my colleague Grianne McGrath here, who is a multimedia content developer also with CELT. And so our session, we're really going to focus on, I guess, the resources that are available to support podcasting at the university. And I kind of think of that in two ways, in terms of like the facilities and the personnel who are available to support it. And kind of like thinking back to Dominic's poll there at the beginning, do we have a designated podcasting service? I also answered yes. But maybe we've got a lot of services that support podcasting rather than a designated podcasting service. Maybe, I don't know, Ronnie might disagree or agree, I'm not sure. But yeah, so as we go through the session, we're going to talk about the facilities that we have available and the personnel. So they're media content developers, learning technologists, digital experience developers, and other technical staff. So I think the kind of most important resource that we have for supporting media development, including podcasts, is the CELT Studio. So that's run by my excellent colleagues, Plomp and Grianne, who are both here on the call. And so I'm going to pass over to Grianne to speak about the studio first, and then I'll discuss some of the other elements after that. So are you okay to go?
Yeah,
there?
I'm all good. Thanks, Jeremiah. Yeah, so I'm just going to talk about the service, I suppose, the podcasting service that we offer in the centre. So just to let you know that at the University of Galway, we have a small recording studio that was revamped just before COVID. It was fully refurbished, but we've had it over 10 years in different forms within our centre. It also records video, but what we're talking about today is podcasting, and because I suppose of the increase in, I suppose, people and staff and colleagues looking to create podcasts, we have even created a separate, smaller studio space within our studio dedicated to podcasting. And then I suppose recording audio as well, because some of what we record isn't truly podcast by some people's definition. So it's not always a podcast series. We can also create one-off pieces of learning content or interviews and conversations, and they might not be part of a series, but we consider them, I suppose, under the podcasting umbrella. So yeah, the studio is based in the building that we work in. Here's the studio team. That's myself and Plomp, and Plomp is with us on the call today. If anyone has any questions, we'll be answering them together afterwards. So that's the two of us, and we facilitate any bookings in the studio. So you send a request in with the project brief on what you want to do, whether it's video or audio, in this case audio, and then we work through the planning of that with you, and then we fully facilitate the recording. So I think the next slide is, yeah, so before the studio was refurbished, just to give you a bit of background quickly, we had a dedicated audio desk. But when we refurbished, we created a couple of different video zones, and that meant we had no room for our audio desk. So our solution that we use now is a roadcaster with microphones, and we have a small podcasting suite now that has a sound enhanced space, and this is dedicated completely to recording audio and podcasts. So we have 4 fixed mics. Anyone who uses the roadcaster will know, but we can also record remote participants via Zoom or any other software that you're using, or from your device, your smartphone. So it's situated within our studio. So the video studio has a control room and a studio floor, and this is a separate studio sound enhanced space. It's fully facilitated and supported by myself and Plomp. As I said, there's 4 fixed microphones into the roadcaster, and we're set up to record remote participants. We record to HD card and laptop, and we also support any post-production. And then I suppose, just because Dominic was speaking about it also, we do support the piece as well, where people are looking to find out where they should host it or how they can host it. We also support people in that. There's no one solution, certainly not. And there's a range of things, and people want to keep things internally within the institution. On the VLE, we have now Blackboard, or also if they want to share them on Kaltura, Turum Media, which will be external or internal. And then we also have people who share them on wherever you get your podcast type hosting as well. So I think that is really, that's a summary of what we do in the studio, and I'll have some examples at the end. And then just to quickly mention, another way that we support podcasting within our institution is through our Digital Champions Initiative. And this is a staff-student partnership where we our goal is to build digital skills and competences for all our staff and students. So it's workshops throughout the academic year that are open and free to staff and students together. They come together as equals for the workshops. And one of the workshops that is really popular and that we've been running since we started is a podcasting workshop, and it's a fun, hands-on, practical workshop. And I suppose I should have said that the CELT studio is really open to staff. So staff request to use the studio, but students can't. They can bring students with them as part of the project, but the studio, we just don't have the people power to facilitate podcasting for all students. But as part of the Digital Champions Initiative, we welcome students to come to the workshops, and we support them, I suppose, slightly differently in that the workshops are very hands-on. Students go away with the skills maybe to be more confident in creating podcasts themselves. They receive a digital badge for podcasting. We give support and advice throughout the year, and they sign up. And here's a link to our Eventbrite if you want to have a look. There's an explanation and much more details about the podcasting. And then also we ran a workshop at the OEB conference a couple of years ago, and the slides for that are long and much more detailed than I'll go into today. But you're welcome to have a look at those, and I'll share them as well after the event. So I think that's that one. And then just to say examples, if people are curious who's coming to us or what our colleagues are asking about, the types of podcasting and audio that we create is completely broad. So it can be promotional pieces for our colleagues. It can be research, interviews and conversations between staff and students, between researchers, between guest speakers, or VIPs who come to visit our institution. We also record narration and audio to complement any types of advertising, or even if people are producing learning content. And the topics are wide and broad as well. So everything from human rights, law, School of Education. Our active consent program is really, really busy at the moment. So they're creating loads of podcasts and resources. And also the School of Languages. They would come to us a lot as well. And also they, I suppose, to note independently, they also would be supporting their own students in creating podcasts as part of their learning, their language learning and development. So I think that's me, and I'll hand over back to Jeremiah. Thanks.
Great. Thanks a million, Grianne. Yeah, so I think as Bloneth mentioned there in the chat as well, it's available to students if they're working with staff there as well. But I guess the one kind of main distinction there about the studio is that, you do need the technical staff, Bloneth and Grianne, to kind of support in there. So in terms of other resources that we have, that's a resource that I think is really, really excellent. And I know Bloneth and Grianne recommend this when they're doing their Digital Champions workshop too, is our library's makerspace. So in our makerspace, it's located in the library. There's lots of different media production equipment that's available there. And importantly, as you can see there in the bottom left, there's a space with computers that are quite good. And they also have the Adobe Creative Cloud Suite. So software like Adobe Audition, which can be used for audio editing, which is really important. And again, kind of feeding into the kind of personnel part, our colleague Eileen Kennedy, who said it was happy for me to share her details here if anyone's interested in learning about the makerspace. She's also there on hand to kind of support people. But I think the makerspace really supports a kind of DIY approach. So there's equipment in there that students or staff can take out, like Zoom recorders, lapel mics. More recently, they've got this Rode podcasting microphone. And then, of course, there is the computers with the software there to allow students and staff to edit themselves, edit their podcasts in that space. So that's a really, really excellent and important resource as well. And again, having Eileen, who's a digital experience developer there, it's really, really important too. So there are the two kind of real core spaces, I think, the CELT Studio and then the makerspace. So beyond that, there are lots of other personnel across the university that are available to support. So my role is that of a college learning technologist. So within the university, we have 4 primary colleges. arts, science and engineering, medicine, and business, public policy and law. And each of those has a designated learning technologist. So I'm the learning technologist for science and engineering. And so in my role there, it's obviously supporting the kind of day-to-day, learning technology stuff, Blackboard, the virtual learning environment, and so forth. But we're also there to support media content development for learning and teaching. And I kind of did a straw poll with the other college learning technologists to find out how much of an interest there is in podcasting from their college, how much they're asked to do it. And so variously, they're all asked to do it in some way. It could be advice, and that might involve them just pointing them to Grianne and Blonnet in the studio. It seems like Leisha in arts and myself are the ones that are asked more about podcasting. I would probably say that I'm asked more about video than podcasting. But for example, I've ran sessions on podcasting for science communications, for example, or some of the research institutes that are linked to our college. And so that goes through everything, like Dominic mentioned, kind of how to record it, how to kind of host it, and how to syndicate or disseminate it as well. So it's kind of going through all that different kind of content. So also in relation to that, a shameless plug, I have my own podcast, which is separate to my work, which is a musicology podcast. So I do have an interest in this kind of aside from my kind of day job as well. And so I've got that experience to bring as well. And likewise, the other college learning technologists, like Lindsay, for example, has a master's degree in digital media. Leisha also has a kind of experience in broadcasting as well before working as a learning technologist. So we all have kind of experience in this area as well. So I guess the other side to all this, there are the resources and the people. So what is happening, who's creating? Of course, across the university, there are loads of people creating different podcasts or using audio in education. Just one or two examples briefly. The College of Medicine has its own podcast, which is the Leading Minds podcast. So this isn't, there isn't involvement from the college learning technologists in this. This is primarily driven by the academics involved and the comms team there. Additionally, some of the research institutes, like the Moore Institute, has its own podcast as well. So I've spoken to the technical officer there who's involved in this. And this is kind of interesting in the sense that this is based on their seminar series. And their seminar series is, well, obviously during the pandemic was ran over Zoom. And so it was a YouTube first kind of product. And then the podcasting was kind of an afterthought in a way. So they would make the digital content, the video content, upload that to YouTube, and then kind of extract the audio and use that as a podcast as well. So they've got kind of two streams of dissemination. And so kind of admittedly, I think they've recognized that there's more drive towards the video content and the podcast content, but that's kind of because the video content is what they've had in mind in the first instance. And then also one of the research institutes were linked to our college. They've also bought some equipment recently, so something like the Zoom H8 here. So most of you will be familiar with Zoom recorders, but the more recent one, the H8, is interesting. As you can see in this image in the bottom, it's got three colored icons there. The first one is for field recording, the second one is for music, and the final one is for podcasting. So obviously Zoom have realized that the primary use of their products are podcasting, and so they've got something built in. And I think this is important because it allows people to add like samples and sound effects and record kind of in the box. They don't have to edit afterwards. So that's kind of an important or useful tool. So actually, I just added this back in actually because Dominic mentioned it, kind of the history of podcasting. And I think like an important thing to mention is that, you know, originally it's a disruptive media, and what distances it from broadcasting in general is that it's got a narrow focus, or some people refer to it as narrowcasting. So, you know, if any of us went to our national broadcasters and said, you know, we want to do an hour-long show on genetics, they would say no because it's too long and it's too specific. And so that's kind of what podcasting allows us to do. And traditionally, scholarly communications, of course, is done by journal articles and so forth. But you know, podcasting allows people to communicate scholarly ideas with the immediacy of the internet, which I think is an important point. So more recently, myself and colleagues in the College of Science and Engineering have been thinking about a podcast from our college, and kind of looking into that and scoping it. The Journal of Science Communications has kind of talked about why other scientists communicate using podcasts, like what's their primary goal. And so based on a survey of 147 different science podcasters, they don't see it as an avenue to communicate their research primarily, but more as a kind of a non-informational goal of valuing science as a top priority and kind of building trust with science communities. And you can see why that would be a concern kind of after COVID as well. And also just getting people interested and excited about science more than informing the public about their kind of interim objectives or their research. And so I think that's kind of an interesting point to kind of note. And so with that in mind, I've been kind of scoping with other colleagues in science and engineering about doing a podcast. And actually we found when we were looking into it that this has been proposed as an idea some years back already. So this was a kind of an initially proposed idea by a colleague of ours, Gavin Collins. And this was an initial idea for a college podcast, but this kind of fell to the wayside, likely because of workloads and capacity, workload capacity and things like that. So I guess we're trying to revisit this again, and kind of with those other ideas in mind, what are the aims of a podcast, and it's probably more for kind of public outreach, I guess, is kind of would be the aim for the college. And I think with that, without running over time, that's kind of hopefully a good overview of the kind of different resources that we have, the facilities, some of the people who can kind of support podcasting, and then kind of from my own perspective, thinking about podcasting within my own college. So yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you for that. We're going to move on to the University Saxion of Applied Sciences. Sorry, I didn't say it the right way. Saxion University of Applied Sciences from the Netherlands. It's your turn. Thank you.
Thank you, Monika, for this introduction. And we are getting the slides already in place. Thank you, Tim. Tim and I are going to tell you something about how we facilitate podcasts at our University of Applied Sciences. My name is Cecille.
My name is Tim.
And we will go through this presentation for you. So what we're going to tell you about is the following points. So how we get started, something about formats and elements, our experiences and tips, how do we really do the supporting and the techniques, and the experience of a student and a teacher. So that will be at the end. And of course, a little bit about our plans in the future. So yeah, how did we start it? We started in 2019, and we were asked to do a workshop to tell students how to start with creating a podcast. So they had to create their own podcast instead of a video. So it was new for them back then, and they were really enthusiastic about it because it was new. So what I did is I started a presentation for them, and this is also something I would like to give to you as an idea. So what can you do in education if you are using podcasts? You can do two things. You can do show or listen together to a podcast. For a reason that students will be activated because they're listening to a very vivid story and they want to know more about it, and then they discuss it with the class. So you can use an existing podcast, and there's a lot of podcasts these days to find. And second, the podcast I will show you is that the podcast itself also is a real nice example to explain what a format is when you're starting with podcasting. So what I'm going to let you listen to is a 1-minute podcast of the VPRO, a Dutch television network. And this particular 1-minute podcast, it is in Dutch, has won a special prize in 2008. So it's a very old podcast, but it's still very good. So if you listen to this podcast, what do you hear? So this is what I'm going to, if you want to start it, Tim, for me, then you can continue.
Psst, 1 minuut. De boerderij.
Kom jongens, hup. We gaan nu de koeien naar voren jagen. De koeien moeten allemaal naar de stal. En als ze dan uitgemolken zijn, dan mogen ze weer het land in. Hey.
We zijn dus van de boerderij af sinds 4 jaar. Onze jongste zoon heeft het overgenomen. Die zit nu op de boerderij. Mijn man die gaat dan wel dagelijks, gaat hij nog naar de boerderij, dan gaat hij op zijn fietsen. Dus dat is al een paar keer op een dag dat hij zo heen en weer fietst.
Hier liggen je roots en hier ligt je leven. Dat blijft zo.
Ik wil graag altijd weg. Ik wil graag wel eens op vakantie en hij niet. En dan heb ik mijn oudste zus, die is weduwe. En die zegt dan wel eens van, goh, gaan we mee? Gaan we lekker een weekje hier of een weekje daarheen? En dan zegt mijn man gelijk van, ja, dat moet je doen, dat is leuk.
En ze mag van mij, hoor.
Dan heb je het al bijna voor elkaar met mijn zus. Dan zeg ik, ben je nou helemaal gek?
Dat doet ze toch ook niet.
Ik wil met jou. Als jouw kinderen er geen zin in hebben, dan ben je er vanaf. Maar als een van jouw kinderen het bedrijf overneemt, dan blijf je er eigenlijk altijd aan verbonden.
Hop.
So what you just heard was a farmer who was explaining something about that his son was taking over their farm. And his wife really likes to go on holiday, on vacation, but he still is too connected to his farm. So this is a topic that you can use as starting up a conversation in the class. So, but then about formats.
Yes, we have 3 formats we use mostly at Saxion. The first one is a solo format. There is only one person speaking with the intro and the outro and some music. We had the interview, so one person is interviewing someone else, normally a guest speaker about the subject. And then we have a documentary style, and that's a little bit more with sound effects, like you just heard, the farmer on the farm, the cows who are mooing. So that's the documentary style. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit and show you what the elements are of the podcast. The yellow one is the intro and outro. The green one is where we are. Sometimes we are on location. Sometimes we are in the studio. And who is our guest? What do we hear? The pink one is the podcast content. So the interview or the discussion, what is taking place. Then we have a soundscape, and at the end, the summary and thanking our guest. We also have some experience and tips. Like for the preparation, we had a podcast, Positieve Gezondheid, Positive Health. And Cecille and I, we nearly did anything for the preparation because Sandra, the lecturer, did such a good preparation that we didn't have to do anything. And Cecile, it's funny because we did actually do something. And what was it?
Yeah, it was the workshop we gave, and that felt very good because the workshop we gave, we just saw the results of that workshop in her preparation. So that worked very nice. But also, if you're talking about location, we had a chance to go to the University of Utrecht. We did a podcast with Beatrice de Graaf, professor, and we were excited about it. But when we came there, the location itself, we didn't check beforehand. There is no time. So there were a lot of noises in the background. So we also have to be, very flexible in the location. So what did we do actually, Tim, back then?
Well, we put on some notes with Mark, look out for noises, don't slam with the door, because we're recording a podcast. But as you know, the most people don't pay attention to notes. So during the podcast recording, we heard doors slamming and sounds on the hallway. But because of we have nice equipment, good equipment, you didn't hear it in the podcast recording. So that was very nice. So you have to be flexible when you're recording a podcast. Sometimes you are on location and then something happens, and you have to be flexible to adjust to the situation. then we are going to tell you something more about our support and technique. Our colleagues from Galway already told you about the roadcaster, so I won't say anything about that, but we also have a roadcaster, and we have a Zoom H6 and Zoom PodTrack. The roadcaster is a little bit less mobile, but as you can see, we bring it sometimes on location. And yeah, Cecille, you want to say something about the recording on location?
Yeah, well, also about the roadcaster, what my experience is now is that if you look at the equipment, it really enables more focus on what is happening. So the podcasters are really connected with each other. So that helps the conversation. It helps the real experience of the conversation the people have together. So a lot of people we get to know by doing this supporting. We see them, they put on the headphone, they have the microphone, they for the first time they hear themselves, and then when they are in the podcast they are feeling very, very happy about it, and you see that the quality of the conversation is very going up because of the Roadcaster Pro, I think.
Yes, and we are editing our software in the Adobe Audition, and we have a workflow we are using, and this is our workflow. So teachers and staff can record a podcast themselves. That is a DIY version we are offering. We're also offering a semi-DIY, so they're recording the podcast themselves, but they can ask us questions about the recording or about the script for the podcast. But the most common version we're using at Saxion is together. So teachers and staff come to us, we create the script together, they are writing the script, we're giving feedback, and then we are recording the podcast with the teachers and we are editing the software. And then we put the podcast on video.saxion.nl. We're using Kaltura, and that is pushing it towards Spotify and Apple Podcast. And to give you a little bit of an example, this is how our script looks, a small version of our script, so that the teacher or a staff member can write the script with the time frame. And then we are looking at it and giving feedback like, oh, this question is not the right question for maybe this subject, or something like that. And then we're going to the recording. This is the recording with Beatrice de Graaf. On the left side here was the hallway. So as you can see, we were on location for this recording. And when the recording is done, we're editing our podcast in Adobe Audition. So we have in this podcast 2 speakers, the complete mix, and Cecille was doing the intro for this podcast. And then we're having a feedback form. So the title of the video, the link to the video, what version, the date, and who's giving the feedback. And then we can, with the time frame, see exactly where we have to adjust the podcast. So that's working very nicely. And then when it's done, it's going on Spotify. We have 5 podcasts for Skirty and Jij. That's the podcast with Beatrice de Graaf. And yeah, that is our workflow for this podcast.
So looking at the time, I will go a little bit faster. This is Dominic. She's one of our students. And she says, creating podcasts for my study really gave me a sense of ownership and creating something real. And she says it really helped our group, our student group, to get support from the Saxion video unit in getting started and publish the podcast. So it was very nice to hear from her. And for the perspective of a teacher, which you can see here. He told us it really saved a lot of time using podcasts in my classes. We got more interaction in class, and still we received the same knowledge of our guest lectures without inviting them every semester. So that were two quotes from two different perspectives. At the end of our presentation, I promised you some things about what are our plans. Looking at the time, well, here are some details of when we started in 2019 at the bottom of the slide. So you can see there's an increase of requests here. And this is excluding the teachers that are using podcasts. These are the podcasts we are facilitating for the teachers and the students. And we are planning to do more interactive podcasts to get it more activated. And we also wanted to make more, we bring more layers to the podcast. So make it a little bit more documentary-like. And of course, and to make people enthusiastic about podcasts is what we do in our workshops. And we're in a while we are going to give some more workshops. And we are at the end of our presentation. So thank you. And this is our team, Saxion Video Unit. Yes.
Thank you so much for that. So we're just going to move on to Sebas, Leiden University. It's your turn. And then after that, we will open the floor for Q&As. But keep on using the chat. It's very busy. I like it.
Yes, can everybody see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll talk a bit about, let me just slide it over here. Now I'm looking straight at you. I'll share a bit about the podcast workshop pilot we do at Leiden University. And it's very nice to hear all the different approaches of other people supporting and making podcasts for other universities. So very nice to hear. So I'm hoping also to steal a bit knowledge, because we just did the pilot like a month ago. So we're trying to steal nice tips and tricks from everybody. So I will talk a bit about, what was the pilot about? The technical workshop.
Can you put it in presentation mode?
This must be better, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're seeing the presenter view rather than the other one. If you go to the top left, it says swap displays. Yeah.
This is better. The technical workshop, then a bit of the didactical workshop, and a bit about our future plans. So I did this pilot with myself, with Monika and Jens, who is not here. Monika already briefly explained in the beginning that we're working for Link, and our role as a center changed a bit. So we're a bit more seen as the central support for everything that is related to innovative media, and also podcasting is now a part of it. The technical workshop. So it started, I think, during the pandemic, when a certain faculty asked Monika to help them to record a podcast with different stakeholders overseas. Because during pandemic time, it was not possible to get people into the studio, of course. So Monika advised them via MS Teams, which was also like the platform that was used to record the actual podcast. And she had a small gathering with some people that wanted to record a podcast. And that was the form, and the content was really like how to record a podcast with different stakeholders overseas, everybody living in different time zones, having different equipment. So one of the main points was also what equipment to use at home, that at least there is kind of a decent recording. So the materials that were created was really the basics, like how to sit in front of a microphone, what are the different modes of a microphone. And then also a very important thing was that everybody recorded their own audio with Audacity, so that later on, at least that audio would be good enough to edit the podcast with. So that's very short about the technical podcast, technical workshop that I was not involved with myself. So I don't have a lot to tell about that. So now about the didactical workshop. So the technical workshop was very ad hoc, and the didactical workshop, we were asked by a certain faculty to help them to train their supporting staff. So a lot of faculties in Leiden University have the means to do podcasts and have some staff members that really do the technical part. But a lot of times they are mainly there for the technical part and not so much for the didactical part. So that was kind of the request that we got from the faculty. So yeah, me, Monika, and Jentel, who you see next to me in the picture, and she has a background in instructional design, and I'm a bit more like I did media and culture and a bit more hands-on filmmaking. So yeah, it was really nice to do that together with her. And we did it in a classroom setting. We had 10 participants. We did it for 2.5 hours, which on paper looks very long, but when you're really doing it there, it's very, very short. And we did a homework assignment. And for me, that was like the biggest win, because it was, well, let me briefly explain. The homework assignment was that the participants just had to record a podcast for a maximum of 5 minutes. They had to write a script for it. They could choose any topic that they wanted, and just to have fun. They could record it with their phone or via MS Teams or in any way they wanted. And they sent it to us, and we all wrote personalized feedback for them. And that worked very well, because then everybody was very engaged, and they could really test it out. Before we were talking about different formats, they already had kind of a sense of how that would look like, or what format they used, or what format they would maybe use in the future. So what we discussed during that didactical workshop was how to write a script, what format suits your idea best, and how to implement the podcast in your course. But like I said before, 2.5 hours went by very, very, very fast. So we're still working on it, and I think also different faculties ask for different approaches. So I think we have to do kind of a basic workshop and then ask the faculties if they want kind of specialized topics that we can go over with. So this was a homework assignment. They prepared a short script and recording, and we sent everybody personalized feedback, and that was really well received. So that's definitely something that we would like to keep. Oh yeah, so the fun part, now it looks like the rest of the workshop wasn't fun, but it was. But we also wanted to make it a bit fun for ourselves. So we thought, okay, it's nice to for the participants to feedback something, but instead of feedbacking each other, which can be also sometimes a bit harsh because they just tried it for the first time, it's actually better if they can feedback a bit of a weird podcast. So we created our own podcasts, and the idea was that it was a bit of a mockumentary podcast. And the topic was that because of the housing problem, that students and professors had to share the office space, and that was kind of done in a live news show about Leiden University. Well, I'm just going to play a snippet of it so that you have an idea what we did. So we have Monika as our presenter. You hear me as the faculty manager that was quite upset, and Jentel was the spokesperson to implement the housing.
Leiden University News Podcast Show, your #1 source for news about Leiden University.
Due to the ever-growing shortage of student housing here at Leiden University, the university's real estate division has come up with a pilot project to tackle this issue. The idea behind this experiment apparently is that the staff will use the space as an office up to 5 p.m. and the students will use it as their room up to 6 a.m.
Who's going to inform my colleagues that they have so little space and now have to share that? And I'm sorry, I'm just very emotional right now.
Mary, any comments on your side?
Well, first of all, I'm getting some very negative vibes from Niles.
Yes,
I'm sorry, but
of course.
However, this idea, I can assure you, has been thoroughly thought through, and I would like to refer you to our information pamphlet. Here, I have it right here.
Well, that was a very short snippet of what we did, but it was fun. It was fun also to make a podcast with our small team to really understand like how it works again and the do's and don'ts. And yeah, creating a podcast is also fun, and I think that's good to emphasize it and make sure that that you take a bit away of the fear that teachers have to engage with such things. I'm already getting a bit at the end, so we did a technical workshop, and that. Let me see. So the technical workshop, we are not getting into that so much more. The idea is a bit that the staff at each faculty takes that role. So the goal of our part is to kind of set a quality standard. So we will, of course, help them and share our knowledge, and we try to unify our knowledge. But we won't be doing those workshops so much because each faculty has their own staff, and I think they're perfectly capable to do that. And it's also nice if they have like good contact with the teachers that walk around there. So the didactical workshop is still in development, and we also think it's important to create a community, so that everybody can learn from each other. We can use examples from the community. They can help each other. And the validation is also important, because lots of time maybe people are already doing great things, but they just need somebody to say that they're on the right path. And in that way, maybe they lose a bit of fear and they will just really go forth with the project and spend more time on it. And at the same time, because of our innovation background, we all also really pushing for people to just do different things. So maybe you heard of there is a podcast that is like also kind of an escape room, and each episode gives you a clue, and then in the end you can solve the riddle. Those are really a bit next level things that of course won't be the thing to do for people who just start out, but it is really nice to also explore those possibilities. That's more for the real enthusiasts and has a bit of a clear goal, but we still think it's very important to explore new formats. So it's also very important to still keep doing that. And that was it. Thank you. And hope to hear some nice questions.
Great. Thanks, Sebas. I know that the chat's been very busy. So Dovi, I would actually like to just ask you, is there any question that we should tackle now before we go into the other Q&As or open the floor?
So there were a couple of questions, but there was a question about dissemination. If anyone would like to share how you make sure that what advice do you give to podcasters?
Does anybody want to take that question? Anybody have an answer?
Sure. I think the easiest way these days to do it is by using Anchor FM, which is Spotify's podcasting application. So you can upload your podcast there, and that syndicates it straight into Spotify. And from there, it syndicates it out to Apple Podcasts, which kind of disseminates it everywhere else. So, I mean, like traditionally, you had to use an RSS feed and get it to Apple Podcasts first, and then that would syndicate it out from there. So that's what I had done originally for mine. But I think recommending people now, I would say Anchor FM. That would be my opinion anyway.
Yeah, Dominic, you've got your hand up.
Just responding to the one about transcripts as well. I don't think it's something that, because the podcasting sector is really is still that settled yet, I don't think there's really a common approach to it. I put in the chat one of the examples I've seen with the UCL approach. They host a text file somewhere on their own servers, and they put a hyperlink in the SoundCloud descriptions, so that there is a connection to transcripts and a nod to accessibility, but the platforms haven't been, I don't think, fully integrated in this sense yet. I could well be wrong and find lots of other quality examples of people that are doing this well, but.
Yeah, I used transcripts for the podcast that I was working on, and that was because I dealt with lots of accents, very international university, of course, and yeah, so not everybody could understand what the one person was saying. And then we did interview people in Asia, and even with the Audacity installed, there was still a little bit of a gap because of the Wi-Fi connection. Somehow it just went all strange. And then we just needed to sort of make sure that you really understood what that person was saying, because they couldn't, either from a technical issue or from like I said, the accent being the problem. And then it just became an automatic process to just include transcripts with everybody that we interview. Right. So I think we can open up the floor. So if anybody has burning questions or they want to ask something to one of the speakers, we can do that now. Otherwise, I have a couple of questions that I can just pose to all of you, really. So anybody, any raising hands, takers? No?
Monika, maybe before we jump in, we can run those 2 polls to see how many people are actually producing podcasts.
And did you also post the results from the first poll that you?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
And we will share the results of these polls after the seminar too.
Awesome, thanks.
Almost everyone has answered the poll. And I will share it now. Hope you can see the results okay. So yeah, it looks like more than a half of the people here have produced podcasts. So that's interesting. And it looks like podcasts are here to stay, and there's more and more of them. So that's also good to know.
Yeah.
I'll just stop sharing.
Okay, so for me, I'm going to ask the first question. Maybe it'll have you guys give me some answers that I'm dying to know. For Leiden University, at least the support that we've been providing, we've mainly provided it to staff and faculty, not really students. So from the speakers, I think all of you have really been giving support to students and staff. And I want to know if any of your approaches were different, completely different, or whether it was just a few things that you needed to adapt that were more applicable to the student or the staff members? Does anybody have a workflow or tips and tricks? Because I would really like to know.
I can tell you something about it. What we do with staff is what we're used to do. Also with video, we have an intake, a conversation, and then we go with a preparation, and we go and set a date for recordings. But when it comes to students, what we did is we asked the group of students to have one particular person that is the contact person, and we also made a process in with Kaltura. So what we did is we explained them first how to make a podcast. We came in a lecture. We had let's say 45 minutes to explain something to them. Then they started creating their own podcast with a group, and then they uploaded to Kaltura, and then we received it automatically. So then we could listen to the podcast. We can give them some feedback, and then we push it further onto iTunes and Spotify. So they have a little bit of guidance together with the process itself. So this is completely different than what we do with the teachers.
Dominic, you also mentioned that you were supporting both student and staff. Did you also have different workflows for both audiences?
Yeah, I was just looking for a blog post that we'd done with some students. We don't have a formal student support service as such, mainly because we're a staff-facing service anyway. But I know that there has been interest from students. There has been, we have a teaching and learning community that we, sort of community of practice initiative that we run on Microsoft Teams. And sometimes within those sorts of spaces, we'll run events. And I think we had some students coming in and giving us we have what we call digital student advisors. So the students who are paid to give other students support with digital literacies and skills and things like that. And I think we had an event there where they talked to each other, and they produced a podcast in interviewing each other about a key topic. Like I think it was the sort of cameras on or cameras off debate, and we supported them in turning it into a podcast. But it wasn't a regular formal part of our workflow. But one other example I have seen at City as well is courses that have kind of a wider approach to assessment. And they say, well, you know, these are your learning outcomes. This is what we want to see the assessment in, but you could deliver it in any format. I remember one particular one in our business school where students chose to create a podcast series, and they went off and did all of this themselves, and they put it on. I found it on Spotify, but I found it by accident. It was a sort of things growing amongst the weeds that you don't formally get to hear about. So that's, you know, you need to keep your eyes and ears open for these initiatives as well. Thank you, Miranda, for dropping that one in the chat as well.
And Jeremiah, did you have any different approaches?
I think an observation I have about academics who want to make podcasts is that, you know, primarily they're not technical. That's why there are technical staff hired by the university. And so really they just want to get their content together and get it out. And so, I mean, maybe Blonith and Grianne have other comments about this, but I mean, that's why I think currently I would recommend something like Anchor FM, the Spotify tool. And I feel like I'm almost advertising it now at this point, but it's pretty simple as a kind of one-stop shop thing. You don't even need any additional tools. You can record using your computer's microphone into the web app as a kind of recording device. It's got an audio enhancing function where it tidies up the audio, so it kind of doesn't sound like you're in your room. It sounds like you're in a kind of deadened studio space, and disseminate it from there. And that kind of links into some of the questions in the chat about how long it takes to edit. I think academics don't want to spend time editing, and again, that goes back to technical staff kind of doing that kind of work. But yeah, I think a lot of people just kind of go with their own. You know, a lot of people are creating podcasts on their own, and I think things like Anchor facilitate that a little bit.
Yeah, I like the do-it-yourself approaches very much, because I think that you know, like really puts you out of your comfort zone. But there is a point where you get to quality, right? I would like to know, how do you approach that? Because there will be bad podcasts that are released. Do you have anything implemented or in place to handle that? How do you tackle that conversation? Because I mean, initially it's the university or the faculty's image, really. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, that is what we did. So they created a podcast. We listened to it, and we listened to it in two ways. Technical, is everything all set? But also, does it have an intro? Is it clear where we are listening to? Is it too long, too short? So we give them some feedback, and then there was one particular episode that was really not good enough, and the students were pointing towards each other. Yeah, but he had done this, or he. So we got a conversation with them and give them some tips and advice, and then they made a very nice new episode. So the problem was solved.
I think there's a couple of considerations here. One of them is obviously around production values, but the other one is around the audience as well. So in the podcasting service that we run at City, at the moment, it doesn't go out onto the wider web. And as I said, we just publish within the walled garden of the VLE. So, you know, really it's making audio files available to students and students only. And in the consideration of that sort of audience, production values don't matter so much. The reputation of the audience of the institution don't quite matter so much. It's more about the rapport that can be created between staff and students in using the medium. And you know, we wouldn't need to intervene there in that case. Where it's something that is seeded across the wider web, that's the sort of thing where that's why I might have spoken to our marketing department and tried to sort of forge a common position. And you know, I think, you know, UCL's probably I mentioned them a couple of times. They're probably a good example where that goes through, all of their different academic ones go through a sort of central pipeline that has this quality filter to it. You know, and they have a form that says, you know, give me all, you know, these different pieces of information. So if it hasn't got a good title, it won't go out onto SoundCloud, that sort of stuff. So I think, you know, think about the audience is a key thing. If an academic's just, you know, recording a message on their phone on the train on the way in, and it sounds all right, you know, that can go out to the students as a, you know, thanks for reading this bit, here's what we're going to be doing next week. You know, that's fine, really.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I see, Jeremiah, you also posted something about audio being cleaned up. There's all the tools that are coming out, which is super helpful if you know how to use them.
Yeah, I think like Anchor and Adobe have these, I think they're targeted at people who aren't specialists, really. It's just a kind of a switch, and it kind of does the compression, it does the equalization to kind of tidy up the audio for you. So I think in that sense, it's becoming easier and easier. And as kind of Dominic was saying there, obviously the content is super important, but I think if the audio quality is bad, people will stop listening, especially when people are listening on like very basic headphones like earbuds, which, you know, can be hard to listen to poor quality audio on. So I think, yeah, audio quality is important.
Yeah, absolutely. We did a study, especially during the pandemic, with all the students, and that was one of the biggest complaints. They said, we don't worry about the video quality. We understand that teachers are in, you know, in whatever environment, but as long as the audio quality is at least good enough, then you will keep our focus. I think that was really one of the key takeaways we got. Then I would like to, again, anybody want to ask questions? Because I've got lots of them. No?
John in the chat asked about monitoring analytics. And do you do that with your podcasts?
I'm going to sound like Jeremiah and advocate Anchor.fm here. There's an app that tells you how many listens you've had, and it's a quick view. It's a very simple metric. I mean, I'm using this for the Teaching Here and There hybrid teaching podcast, and it tells me that I've had 1,600 listens so far, which is enough of a steer. I'd want that sort of stuff in a bigger, wider institutional solution. I'd want to see that integrated more effectively into a learning analytics platform. But there are so many other components to getting that bit right. I mean, I know if we get to a point where we've got Kaltura as our institutional hosting platform, I know there's some good analytics there as well. It's just then integrating that with the rest of the learning analytics platform too.
Anybody else want to respond to analytics?
Yeah, just on that, in the Anchor FM analytics are really good. It breaks down by gender, age, where they're listening from, what kind of device they're listening from. So that's super useful data. For my own personal podcast, I syndicate it actually by RSS feed through through Squarespace. So I use Squarespace Analytics, and they're quite good as well. But I mean, I guess, yeah. And there are a lot of specific analytic tools that you can kind of plug in additionally. So if you're using WordPress or Squarespace or anything else to disseminate, you can plug in separate tools. I think Podbean has one, and there are others out there.
Yeah, we use Acast. It was one of those big arguments because we wanted our audience to be internal and external. So we needed a European-based platform because of all the GDPR issues that were at least a big topic 2 years ago. And they also obviously have a very good analytic reporting system that we use at least to decide on whether that specific podcast series gets the green light to have a season 2 or 3 or whatever, depending on what you want to do with that. So I think it is important to, pick and choose the right platforms for that as well. Then regarding editing, that's a really hot topic for us at the moment because we don't have, everybody seems to have services for supplying the equipment, renting it out, or doing quick toolkits on do-it-yourself recording, but no one's really invested in the editing part, which I think is actually really important. When you're doing podcasting. I mean, it depends on how good you are as a host or whatever interview style you want to do or whatever. But the editing part, I would say, is almost 50% of the work. What advice do you have? I know that you've been posting Adobe Audition as one of them, but my word, that's like a really complicated system. I know I use it. Do you have any other tips on how to get into that? Or do you think maybe we should just have a faculty that does this and don't even bother going that route? Tim, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, we are using Adobe Audition, but we have a academy, creative business at our school, and they teach the students with Adobe Premiere Pro. So they also edit the podcast in Premiere Pro because the students already know the program. So if you know a program where you're used to edit video or audio, use that program and don't dive into Audition because we're recommending Audition. But if you want to, there are a lot of tutorials on YouTube, and once you get to know Audition, it's very easy to work with. And yeah, Audacity is free and easy starting point. Blended, I started also with Audacity, so that's what we're using at Saxion.
I think like the newer podcasting devices, like those who have the Rodecaster, or the Zoom H8, which has a podcasting function. I think if you're happy with your content and you have it well planned out, you just record it and you trigger off the sound effects. Maybe you have a jingle at the beginning, and the end. You trigger them off in time and you record them as part of the session. That removes the need to edit at all, actually, if you want to go that route. That's easier now than it has been in the past. So yeah, I don't know, Grianne or Dominic, have either of you tried to do that, or do you still typically edit?
Well, I suppose there'd always be a bit of minimal editing. If it's a podcast series, it's planned out, you'd have your intro and outro, and it'd still be very straightforward. You can pop them at the beginning, at the end, or any music that's been chosen. And yeah, like Audacity will do that very simply. And I mean, that's very minimal editing. You wouldn't even consider that if you're just popping the intro and then exporting it out as an MP3. Yeah, that'd be very straightforward. And we would recommend Audacity to people. Ourselves, we use the Adobe Creative Cloud. So we use, Premiere Pro as well, or Audition. Yeah, so what we'd recommend for people, Audacity, if they're starting out, because I think it's really straightforward and you can do everything you want there. And then the timeline is very helpful if you want to graduate to different types of software for your podcast.
Yeah, I think it can take away a lot of the fear that staff or students might have when they get started. This could be very technical or it could be tricky, but we say, start with this, and in our podcasting workshop, which is open to staff and students, we get them to install and download Audacity, import in a piece of audio, and cut it and paste it and export it, and they can see how easy that is, and they might move on to other programs from there, but it's a really good way to get them started on that editing process. And the other thing that we would say, when we record with staff and when we use the Rodecaster in our studio, really the need to do any type of difficult editing is removed. It's really about the content. We wouldn't need to do anything with the audio because it is so good. It's really about the storytelling aspect and the content end of it. And we would encourage any staff member or student who's in with us to really plan that end of it out.
Yeah, so I popped in there that we have a podcast planning worksheet that we use in our workshop. And so we hope that to do all of the difficult stuff in the planning and then leave as little editing as possible if we can. Yeah, and have things as scripted as possible and all of the intros and outros scripted, and they could be reused then for people as well.
For any Mac users, as I mentioned in the chat, a nod for GarageBand as well, which is really simple to use and designed for that sort of thing as well.